All right, thank you. Good evening. Thank you for joining us for the Burlington Police Commission meeting. The date is April 23rd, and we're sorry, technical difficulties led to us starting a little bit late, so we're starting at 6:26. Item 1.2, 5 commissioners are present. No, I'm sorry, I stand corrected. 6 commissioners are present. No, how's my math? 5, okay, 5 commissioners are present, and we have a quorum. Also present is Chief Murad and City Attorney Haley McClanahan. Item 1.3, are there any changes or modifications to the agenda? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the approval of the agenda, say aye.
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 Okay.
Aye.
Agenda, thank you. The agenda has been accepted. Item 2.1 is approval of minutes from the regular commission meeting of March 23rd. Any changes?
I move to approve.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor of the approval of the minutes, say aye.
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 Item 3.1 is public forum. So we have at least one speaker in person here, and Tim, I don't know if there's anybody online. Okay. We'll let the face-to-face, in-person speaker go first because he has been patiently waiting. Please say your name, and you can just keep sitting, or it's up to you. Sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we can't hear you.
Yeah, there's no, oh, here we go. We can share our microphone. There's no microphone for the public.
Yeah, I think that should work. This is a new format for me, but anyway, I was visiting Branson, Missouri, meeting some friends there. We stopped at a bar to get a drink before a country western show. Got talking to the bartender, and he was 10 months sober. And it started when he hurt his foot. Got a prescription for Percocet. One of his good friends say, hey, you get a real good high if you snort that stuff. Just crush it up and snort it. So he started doing that. Then he switched to fentanyl, which was a lot cheaper. You get that real cheap on the streets. Well, after a while, he got caught shoplifting. He spent 6 days in jail. Then he went to rehab. And he's been sober ever since. And I've heard similar stories from other people. I've heard some people in this very room say they went through the same thing. They got arrested, and they sobered up. So I know some people think that you're exhibiting kindness or harm reduction if you don't arrest people for committing certain crimes, like low-level drug dealers, drug users, and shoplifters. But I suggest the opposite. The kindest thing you can do is arrest them and get them into rehab. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Is Councilor Grant still there and she wishes to address us? I see that her hand is up. Councilor Grant?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have some notes, but I would like to say that while it is true, depending on the circumstances of an individual, if they are committing crimes, yes, indeed, maybe they should be arrested, but it's not necessarily permissive to say that we need to be sure that we have sufficient resources to help people who want to be in recovery. While the wait times have gone down, there are still wait times. So you have individuals in our community who could be ready to take that step toward recovery, and then they would not have the resources available to them. We have to fix that. And we really need to fix that first. So I just wanted to offer that, because it's a big leap when we're dealing with a situation where we're still not, people say, oh, we're throwing resources up, but the fact is we've never had enough resources. We need more funding, we need more people on the front line doing this work get burnt out. They're not getting the same sign-on and retention bonuses, so it's very, very difficult. But I'm going to leave that there, because I do have some other things that I would like to discuss. I had first given out, I was concerned about the fact that last year the police commission had not produced their annual report. So I would like to propose that maybe this year you consider doing 2 years worth in one report. That maybe that might assist you in reducing the workload. Also, the Public Safety Committee, we are looking for some updates in the CNA items that were assigned to the Public Safety Committee. And I was wondering, I don't know if it would help to have a subcommittee, and then one of the members of the Public Safety Committee could join the subcommittee on the Police Commission, or have an item on the Police Commission to review the open items to give them new due dates. Most of the due dates for the items that were assigned to the commission go back to May of last year. So they're coming up on a year of being overdue. With regards to some questions around staffing and the amount of time the commission takes, I know from personal experience what has been asked of the police commission in the future, in the past, present, and hopefully in the future. It is a very different type of commission from the other commissions, not to say that the other commissions aren't doing good work, but we have really lived through some extraordinary times, 2019, 2020, 2021. We had protests in our community because we had acts of injustice in our community that are real, that resulted in lawsuits, and that affected members of our community. I was very driven. I admit, I was a sponge. I learned everything that I could learn. I continue to learn. I continue to ask questions. And I did an extraordinary amount of work that I did not get paid for. So I do understand it. Maybe I'm motivated differently because the part of the city that I live in was really affected by this. As it stands, the commission still does not have representation for anyone in the central district. And that is a grave concern to me, because when you look at when use of force is used, it's used a lot in the central district. It's used a lot on people who live in the central district. So, and people in the central district have a lot of, not everyone, but there are certain parts of our community that still have significant distrust issues with our police department, and we need to work on that. So I would just say there does need to be a push. I know personally, having talked to some of you about the workload, I tried to do my best to prepare you for that. I failed. I'm sorry. But I do believe that there is a lot more that needs to be done. And I hope that you'll take a look at your schedules and just be honest about what you can or cannot do, to see if it's worth it. I think there's a lot of people looking to this commission to help them, to help the city. I think the police department's looking to this commission for the same thing. I always talk about balance of representing the people in the city and the concerns that we have, and then representing the department. Regarding a quick statement on the body-worn camera draft that was attached to this agenda, this is a real loss of transparency. I really caution you about this. I believe it's important to view as much body-worn camera footage as possible so that you know how the job is properly done. Oh, excuse me. So that you know how the job is properly done, so that you can recognize when it's not. And I think the limitations that are being put in place or are being suggested to be put in place are very, very concerning. To continue with the ideas for submitting feedback regarding oversight and accountability, which hopefully will be taking up again, having some kind of deadline with the commission so that it isn't the commission that ends up holding back this process. So if there's any question as to when the committees will need that feedback again, please let us know. I am available for any type of feedback, any type of assistance. The budget process is getting ready to start. So this would definitely be the time to review issues around staffing. And, you know, we're here, the city council is here to help, but we do, I just advise you that it's important that you reach out to these city council members so that we know what's going on and that we can assist you. Thank you again for your time. And that is all I had for this evening.
Thank you very much. The next is item 4.1 and 4.2, Chief's report, followed by discussion of Departmental Directive DD 40. I just put both of them together. Go ahead, Chief.
Thank you so much, Chair. Do you have the report, and can we share it on that screen? Thank you. I know, it's so much work. That's the directive, so. The Chief's report should be a little bit higher up there. There it is. Swell, thank you so much. Thank you. This begins with if you scroll down, please. It was totality awesome. the eclipse. The eclipse really was wonderful. We had a large number of officers out and other staff as well. Right there, you see one of our CSLs in the hat. With one of our newest police officers. Another one of our new police officers is off to the side. There I am in front of those crowds, and then, you know, that's Battery Park, and you can look down and see how full the waterfront was. What it wasn't was cataclysmically full. If you look at that, that is not more than we see on a typical 3rd of July. That is not more than, and keep in mind too, that we did not have North Beach open at all for this event. So on a typical 3rd of July, you have the waterfront about that crowded, even perhaps a little bit more. You have Oakledge more crowded than it ended up being at the eclipse. You have North Beach open and attracting crowds. And so what we ended up tackling was less than a typical 3rd of July. And as a result, we were able to maintain all the traffic lanes in the city, including the ones that we had set aside for shuttle buses. We didn't have any issues with pedestrians. We had a missing kid towards the end. We had no compromise on our ability to respond to non-event related calls for service. It was a wonderful, wonderful day. I think a tremendous amount of credit is due to Zach Williamson and the Burlington City Arts team that were really the point people for the city of Burlington. We worked very closely, obviously, with our fire partners and with DPW to make sure that we had what we needed for facilitating the terrific events that BCA planned. And we ran an EOC, or Emergency Operations Center, out of 1 North Avenue, but we didn't need to use it in any way other than just sort of keeping track of where people were and what openings there were. So really terrific event. Scroll, please. We had an arson at Senator Sanders' office. Our detectives were instrumental in, particularly Detective Eric Cradaville, instrumental in identifying the perpetrator. We were able to then find him where he'd stayed at local hotels, and ultimately he was apprehended by members of the Chittenden County Gun Violence Task Force, who now operate sort of as a working task force with our federal partners at the ATF. You know, the ATF is really more present here in Burlington than any of our other federal partners, although we do obviously appreciate and work with the Drug Enforcement Administration and with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But our partners at the ATF are really important to us. We work very closely with them, and an ATF agent took Detective Cradaville's great work, turned it into an affidavit, presented it to the U.S. Attorney for the District of Vermont, and we ended up with an indictment. So this individual was indicted. Next, please. 25 years of service. We had an officer retire. This was obviously at 25 years, I knew that this retirement was going to come sooner or later, but I didn't know exactly when. He had announced his retirement very, very late last year, and then he had certain amounts of accrued time that he took, but he's off of our books, not as of the 1st of the month, and so you'll see a discrepancy between, on the next slides, the 1st of the month versus the 15th of the month of April, but he left, his last day was on the 6th. Really wonderful man, was out at the airport for the last many years of his career, was a firearms instructor and a very effective one at that. And we'll miss Corporal Taylor. This is, just a loss of great experience, but I wish him well. And there comes a truth that basically once you hit 25 years, you're actually not getting paid to work anymore. You're sort of paying the city to stay because you're not accruing any more money in the pension. Move forward, please. Thank you. It was National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week. Our dispatch is tremendously important. We cannot function without it. Our dispatch had gotten down to 4 people in a space that was allotted 12. It's now allotted 14. There was a recognition by the previous administration that we needed to increase that, so we did, and we've also been able to rebuild to a great extent. We currently have 10, or I think we're on the verge of having 11 full-time employees in that space, and so we're not at the 14 that is our true allotment, but we're so much better than we were when we were at 4. At 4, we were doing surprising amounts of overtime. We were compelling sworn supervisors who are trained in dispatch to come in, and we really were at a very dangerous position with regard to coverage. I'm glad we're not anymore, and we owe our communicators, our ECS workers, our dispatchers a lot. Next, please. Here's that chart that I mentioned. This, again, I include these in every single report. They are snapshots as of the 1st of each month. And as a result, what this shows is 66 officers. We are actually at 65 now because Corporal Taylor's departure was not counted in this graphic because he didn't leave until after the 4th. The next graphic, please. This graphic is as of the 15th of each month, and so there's sometimes a little bit of a difference. In this case, it says 65 total, not 66. Again, that's because Corporal Taylor is counted in this one and was not in the other. The good news, to the extent that there is any good news on this page, is that our number unavailable is smaller than it has been in quite some time because our officers who were in field training have come off field training and are now eligible to be on patrol on their own, and that includes both those 2 officers who were on that slide from the eclipse that I mentioned. They're both solo police officers now, and as a result, we have more officers on patrol than we had last month, even though we have fewer total officers, which is, we take the good where we can get it right now. Next, please. Here are our CSOs. You'll notice actually that the CSO pictured in the lower left hand is actually the same officer who just graduated from field training. Saja Al-Mogali, a wonderful young woman, and started as a CSO, moved to the police academy and to become a police officer, and is now a solo officer. You'll see our comfort dog, Rocky. We have 3 dogs at the Burlington Police Department, 2 canine dogs who work with police, and then 1 service dog, a comfort dog, therapy dog, who works with our CSLs. Next, please. Thank you. Our year-to-date numbers. We're up 9% over last year. Last year was a lot higher than the previous years. We're at a stage now where we are higher than we've been since a couple of years before the pandemic, really. And the artificial lull of the pandemic is apparently gone and behind us. Next, please. Yes, of course, Commissioner.
Maybe it says this every year, I notice it, but it says in the pullout, BPD is addressing more instances of fewer patrol officers, 50% fewer. 50% fewer from what?
50% fewer from 2018, 2019. In 2019, we had 52 non-supervisory sworn police officers on patrol. We now have 24. Sure. I think what it means is that what I meant it to mean is, and I'm sorry that it's not clear, and I'll fix it in any future ones, is that we are. It used to say earlier versions were more clear and said addressing more incidents than since 2018 with fewer patrol officers, and that would have located it better. Apologies. Next, please. A discussion of the priority response plan. We recently, as in last week, issued an update to the priority response plan. We didn't change anything about the plan. It remains, unfortunately, the same as it has been, but the new document that we posted online and shared with our local media partners, including, of course, the Police Commission and also the City Council, describes it, I think, in a better way, I hope more clear way, and also sort of takes it as a fact that we now have, as opposed to the older document of the priority response plan, which talked about here we are introducing this thing. We've had it now since May of 21. We updated it in May of 22. Again, those were changes to the plan itself. We haven't changed the plan, but the new description of it is available online at our city website. Next, please. Selected Valcor incidents year-to-date as of April 15, and you can see sort of how those move and change through the year. Next, please. Priority 1 incidents. Last year was the highest ever, and this year is a little bit below last year, but is higher than all the other previous years. And here we get into some things that are going to be occupying me for the next month and a half, 2 months. Our partners in the planning department are producing their annual report. And so the city's annual report about the Burlington Police Department, which addresses total incident volume and addresses the number of people with whom we interact. It addresses vehicle stops, traffic stops. It addresses, I'm sorry, somebody maybe is on mute or something. I apologize. It addresses issues around arrests and offenses and uses of force. It will be released next month, but we have seen, early versions. The analyst is not an employee of the Burlington Police Department, but she does work in the Burlington Police Department, which is the only place where she can get that data because of the rules under which we operate with regard to criminal justice information. And so, we've been looking at this, and there's some things about it that concern me. There's some things that are really, I think, great. The big issue for traffic stops used to be the disparity in searches. It was referred to by previous Police Commissioner Stephanie Seguino when she was a professor at the university and doing studies on this, as the gold standard for judging disparity, and it was issues around search. What we have here is an indication that our searches have basically, we don't really do vehicle searches anymore. And so the disparity that existed within those has been eliminated. That's good news. The disparity that we have seen with regard to traffic stops, and we measure the traffic driving population according to crash data. Census data is not an effective method for measuring who's driving in any given place. It is crash data that really gives us that picture. And our crash data has largely been equal to our stops, a little bit off. We had fewer stops than our crash data suggested. Black drivers were members of the population, in the driving population 2 years ago, but it diverged last year, and that divergence has grown this year, and I am concerned about that. We're looking into it. Part of this is about incredibly low numbers. Part of this is about, we only have one officer who did more than 50 stops. In fact, he did 200 stops. Every other officer did fewer than 32, and the majority of them only did 5 or 6. And so how we discern what's happening in those is challenging. If you have 3 vehicle stops and 1 is of a black driver, then you have a 33% stop rate, which is not necessarily, which is way above what the stop rate should be according to just the broad statistic of 9% of crashes involve drivers who are black. And therefore, that is the goal. The officer with 200 plus stops, in fact, has exactly that, has 8-point-something% stops that are black drivers. But then you have other officers who are making many, many, many fewer stops. What does it play in this? I'm going to be digging into that a lot over the next month as it is prepared to be produced and presented to all of you. Next, please. Use of force, the annual report is also expected to show a real increase in the number of incidents of use of force, about 50%. However, arrests are up 58%. And so what I'm seeing is the incidents that are most likely to lead to force, although force can occur in any kind of incident, and it can occur when we are taking somebody into custody for being incapacitated, somebody into custody for in need of an emergency evaluation for mental health, also when we're taking somebody into custody for arrest. But the fact that arrests are up 58% and that use of force is up 50 is, sort of makes sense, but is also concerning. I want to know why the number is up. And as a result, that comes back to the things that we do, including the report that is on this month's agenda, as it is on every police commission agenda, that reveals every single use of force to the best of our ability. We put them all there and let people look at them. And of course, a very transparent effort to say this is how we review uses of force. Every single use of force is reviewed. And in addition, 25% of last year's uses of force are loaded onto YouTube now, where they can be viewed by the public in order to assess, are there issues with these? The mere incidence of a higher number may or may not be an issue. What's at issue is whether or not the force is appropriate, lawful, and proper. And we do our best to make sure that they are. Yes, Commissioner.
Up 50% from what?
From last year's numbers, I don't know.
Arrests are up 50%?
Arrests are up 58%.
Because when I look at I know that arrests aren't on your chart on
No.
page 20, the selected Valcor incidents, but I'm not seeing a 50% increase in any of these numbers, so I'd like to understand a little bit more, if you could help us understand where the 50% increase is.
Well, retail theft isn't on that. Larceny is higher than it has been in previous years. A big driver of arrests is arrest on warrant. Tremendous numbers of arrests on warrants. Frankly, the reopening of the court resulted in a system whereby people were continually being given pieces of paper and then being told to come back to the court at a later point. And then they frequently don't. And when they are encountered subsequently, they've got open warrants for their arrests, and that is an arrest. So arrests don't necessarily lead directly to a crime or the commission of a crime in the immediate moment. They also can be connected to warrants either that are issued by the court for failure to appear or warrants that are issued by officers. For example, we have a number of officers who do a lot of work on our huge pile of online incidents, particularly retail theft online incidents. They will go through, look at video and say, oh, let's see, can I identify this person? They use a variety of means to do so, sometimes just their own knowledge, sometimes other officers' knowledge, and then they'll say, okay, I'll try to find this person on my own. If they are unsuccessful in that, they will request an arrest warrant from the court, so the next time any officer encounters that individual, he or she will be arrested.
Okay, do you think it would be helpful for us to track arrests on the dashboard here?
I mean, I have not done it on these charts. Again, it's something that's in each annual report, so I've left that tracking to the annual report on an annual basis, in part because I don't want arrest to become a performance metric. In the New York City Police Department, where I started, arrests are a very important part of the CompStat model, And I don't believe that, I believe strongly in CompStat, but I don't believe that Burlington is of a size that makes CompStat a useful tool for policing. Obviously, I think the CompStat version that was created for opioid epidemic and addressing substance use disorder is remarkably successful. But with regards to an internal police department CompStat, I've not thought that it would be a great use. And I fear that tracking arrests in that way turns it into a metric that it's not. Next,
I do have a
please.
question,
Oh, sure.
sorry,
Of course.
I'm just kind of looking at the traffic slide, and you said that there is one particular officer who's making those stops
Yes.
at a much higher rate, not significantly higher rate
Yes.
than other officers. So what's usually the protocol there? I mean, is there something that he or she could benefit from more training, or is just something, what's the dynamics that's going on that you think would lead to something like that, the incredible disparity?
That particular officer just does traffic stops. He is a supervisor who takes a lot of overtime that's called sharp overtime. It's a federal and state program that actually says you're working 7 hours or 5 hours on this detail, and your job is merely to pull traffic, to drive, to find safety violations, and say, you know, this is unsafe driving behavior, and enforce the traffic laws, as opposed to somebody who's on a shift and is, you know, working to do other kinds of things. What we find is that, again, as I said, no one, that officer has 200 plus traffic stops in 2023. No other officer had more than 32, and most had many fewer than 32. The handful of officers that did have, say, a dozen, were officers who had been on field training that year. They were put through field training and encouraged to stop vehicles as part of field training, just so you learn how to do it. But once they're off field training, they stop. Officers in the city are generally not doing traffic enforcement. And that is, frankly, the city and the administration in the police department sent a not unclear message that we don't want you doing traffic stops. They were a source of challenge for us. Even this disparity that has reared its head in between 2022 and 2023 is going to be something that's going to cause us pause. That alone is going to send messages internally, stop doing this. You know, this is, I don't want to be subject to what causes this, and therefore we'll see a decrease in traffic again, I believe. We only have one recruit in the police academy right now, so we won't see an uptick in traffic enforcement at the beginning of the summer, which we normally would when we get those officers out. I'm hopeful that we have a nice cohort of officers in the August class, but they won't be out until mid-December, and really won't start doing things like traffic stops until late December or early January. So we probably won't see an uptick in this year's totals, although already this year's numbers are higher than last year's, as you can see on that chart. A lot of that is this one officer who does a lot of sharp overtime. But the things that are addressed in that are almost always speed and or driver behavior safety issues. What concerns us is when we have stops that are made for pretextual reasons and based on insufficient amounts of other determinants, right? So waiting for a person to do to fail to use a blinker merely so you can pull that car over and do what is colloquially called, a fishing stop. We don't want that. I don't want that. I don't believe that it's effective. I don't believe it's a good way of conducting narcotics interdiction. On the other hand, and one of the stops that's in this year's cohort is an officer around the time that we had 2 gunfire incidents at 184 Church Street. Was outside, was sort of down the street from 184 Church, observed a vehicle pull up, pull next to another car, exchange a very short series of words, and an item may have been passed in between the 2 cars, and it drove away. He followed that vehicle, waited for it to basically make an unsignaled turn, and pulled it over. That, at a location like that, when we've had problems at that location, where we know that there is drug activity, where we've had gunfire at that location, doing a stop like that does have a value. And if we were to say unilaterally or blanket no more so-called pretext stops, that prevents us from being able to engage in that kind of activity. And in fact, the individual inside was somebody who was involved in the drug trade at that location. So I believe, I need to check that over. I was actually reading through some of them here. But, those are our concerns for us. We sort of, it's a very delicate balance to have one's cake and eat it too, with regard to making certain that we're doing enough stops to maintain driving behavior. And that crash data, which is only crashes with injury and fatal, shows that driving behavior is not going the right direction in the city. We had more crash and injury than in any previous year in the last decade. And that's something that's concerning. And I do believe that change is driven in part by a lack of enforcement. But do we want to have incidents in which people are not, in which we have any kind of disparity that's driven only by race? That would be absolutely improper and wholly unacceptable. One thing that I do want to do is I want to look at more of these stops to assess whether or not they meet the Department of Justice's standards for transparent, courteous stops, and to determine that those things are being followed at the stop. Thank you. Hiring, as always. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, do any of the commissioners have any questions for the chief? I have a question from Commissioner Cox. If it's possible that automated speed detectors be installed?
It is possible. You could install speed cameras. I believe there is a bill at the legislative level, at the state level, to do just that on interstates and maybe on other, state highway choke points. I am always leery of those. I think they're revenue tools more than safety tools. I think people sort of learn where they are and then behave in that specific location, but not elsewhere. There have been claims. They often have very disparate rates of ticketing, including they tend to ticket or more minorities tend to be ticketed through those camera systems than are in the driving population. Usually the claim is that is not because of driving behavior, but because of where they are located. So you have to be very careful about where they are positioned. I certainly, if that were something the city wanted to do, it could.
Okay, any other questions from any commissioners? Carolyn, Commissioner Hanson. And
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about the traffic stops. I think that I'm concerned about the lack of traffic stops in Burlington. I think we're seeing more and more people speeding, running red lights, crossing over crosswalks, and going through red lights and nearly hitting people. So I guess I just wanted to make that comment. I think that I hear, Chief, in your explanation about all of that there's a little bit of concern about, not wanting to have officers doing a lot of traffic stops. But I think it's very interesting. I had a different reaction than Councilor Rao did to this, Commissioner Rao, because the person who was doing the sharp detail that made 200 and some stops, I know what a sharp detail is, and that's something where the only thing you're supposed to be doing while you're on that assignment is stopping people for traffic infractions like speeding. And, for that officer on that detail to have so many stops, and then the other officers to have very, very few, to me, it shows that there is a real need, but just not sort of the focus or ability to do that on a regular basis. So I do think that's something worth thinking about. And the officers who have such small numbers of stops, I'm sure this is going to come up when you're doing your report, but at least my understanding of that is that you really can't report out any kind of ratios unless you have an adequate sample size. So I guess I would just be concerned about trying to do any sort of analysis with officers who had 10 or fewer traffic stops. It seems that that's not enough to throw into the data set. But that's just, just my thought in listening to that. But I just have noticed so much dangerous, unsafe driving, and it's always been unclear to me, because I know that I heard that the state's attorney's office would only prosecute things where there was a public safety risk. But that's such I think, a hard thing for the public to figure out what that means. I mean, if somebody's speeding over a crosswalk or through a red light, that does cause a safety risk, especially if somebody's in the street. And so I guess it's more of a comment than a question, but I do think it's something worth looking at, because I have seen a huge uptick in what I think is very dangerous and unsafe driving in Burlington. And I think it's partly because there's a sense that, officers are not going to stop people for that sort of driving.
And I worry that that is the sense among the driving population as well, Commissioner. And so thank you for saying all that. Officers used to engage in a lot more traffic for two reasons. One is that the agency wanted them to, and in fact, it was something that was sort of understood as part of your job. At the academy, you learn how to do it. Certainly troopers and many other agencies, it is a significant part of what an officer does in the course of any given shift is traffic enforcement. But this agency leaned away from that pretty strongly in the mid-2010s. And then, as we are currently staffed, officers frankly don't have time to just kind of do traffic stops. They're too busy with other calls for service, or when they're not doing those calls for service, they're trying to catch up on either stacked online reports or on their own paperwork in the back. And so it is not something that they do, but I do think that there is potential fallout for that. And I've said that for a bit now, as we've watched accident and crash with injury sort of tick up. But then we come up against something concerning like these disparities that we're seeing, and then that will quite possibly engender another pendulum swing back to a posture of even less enforcement.
Your computer. Mute your computer. Commissioner Cox had a question too.
I was just wondering, Chief, if you knew anything about any discussions for installing those flashing yellow lights at the crosswalks that go across Prospect, because there's a lot of students and faculty and other people who cross over from the green to Waterman, and the classrooms in Waterman and other classrooms on the other side of the street. And I just saw for years and years, I've seen people late for work and they're rushing up Prospect at, 40 miles an hour, where it's supposed to be 25. And it just seems like having the flashing yellow lights at the crosswalk might help.
Yeah, thanks for that question. When my dad was a professor, his office was in Waterman. So for 35 years, I used to go to Waterman, and the crossing can get pretty hairy there. I have not had this discussion in a couple of years, but back before the pandemic, there were a number of NPA meetings that I attended, and I'd often be there with members of DPW, and we would sort of be addressing the same things, which were, for example, residents on East Avenue very concerned about the rate of speed with which people travel on that route from the jug handle at the interstate exit to Colchester Avenue, and what can be done about that? Putting a stop sign in the middle of the avenue. Do you want to have something more elaborate? DPW is ultimately the entity that makes a determination about installing lighted signage like crosswalks or a pedestrian yield sign that has lights around it. They have said in the past that they are very cognizant of only having a small number of those signs in very specific places throughout the city, because if the signs become ubiquitous, they become ineffective. And if every intersection were to have that lighting, they believe drivers stop paying attention to it. I don't know the data behind that or the studies that may or may not support that, and I don't know how they reckon with which spaces should or should not have it. I do know that after we had a very terrible, fatal pedestrian versus vehicle crash on North Avenue, a sign was placed there. And yet, despite the presence of that sign, just a few weeks ago, at the exact same spot, a young girl on her way to school was struck and terribly injured at that exact same space. And we do believe that the sign was lit at the time. And so, you know, they're certainly not a panacea. There is no such thing in any sort of frame in this world, unfortunately. But they do help. I don't know the metrics by which they are put in place, however.
I do have a question, which is having lived in the downtown area for 20 years now, I definitely see an increase in traffic and pedestrian, and I suspect it's because not just the number of residents, Burlington's population is growing, also tourism is increasing, and then we have more visitors than ever before. And I wonder that sort of plays into the kind of driving that we are seeing people, because the streets haven't gotten much bigger.
Nope.
So it's just you're trying to sort of see that flow, and I wonder if I think this is more of a statement than a policing issue. Sort of, if the city itself needs some traffic engineering to slow things down. I know other cities do, have done creative work. But do you think policing does help, like having, even a car at these locations which are prone to people speeding? I don't know. I mean, so it's a statement and a question, I guess.
I'll just throw my sense in, which is that I absolutely believe that policing affects driving behavior, but the city of Burlington, since the mid-2010s, 2016 or so, has actively made efforts to reduce the amount of police enforcement with regard to traffic remediation, and has instead leaned heavily on engineered remediations. And that includes things like speed tables, speed bumps, speed humps, narrowing streets at the corners. You see it in some of the great streets and beautification efforts that are being made along Main Street or its ancillary streets like St. Paul. A lot of that is done twofold. It is done to beautify and to make the pedestrian areas a little larger. It's also done to make the traffic flow a little bit tighter and slower. And that is, how the city has kept itself safe from a traffic perspective. I think, unfortunately, and I've been saying this for about 2 years now, the direction that we see crashes with injury and crashes fatal moving suggests that we may have reached the bottom of where we cannot have traffic enforcement.
Thank you. Chief, we can safely move on to, I think, 4.2, which is the discussion of Departmental Directive DD40. Do commissioners have any questions? I have a list of changes or, kind of recommendations, but does anybody else want to go first? Commissioner Oski.
Thank you. I was just wondering if you'd given any thought. I see you didn't change the invalid complaint language, and wondering if you'd given some thought to that and you decided to keep it as it was.
If you mean the mental health and, I highlighted it to suggest that I was going to contemplate new language, and also was thinking that maybe new language would be forthcoming from the commission. What I did with this really is Commissioner Keefe had sort of stated, and there was a sort of tacit agreement by the rest of the commission that what I presented last month would be from here forward, the zero document. And so I didn't make very many changes because I thought that we would be discussing, and I frankly didn't want to make a whole bunch of changes to it when I had just given you a version, and then it would become far too confusing. I made a tiny handful of changes, mostly grammar, and one that we had explicitly discussed in executive session, which is found on page, I can't remember now.
Are those the ones in red?
On 9, and these are the ones in red. So those are the only changes that I made from the previous version that was presented last month, I inserted, in addition to that section that is highlighted where you had called question to the language, Commissioner, I also inserted something that said this is where the review committee could, where the review panel might go if created by the council, but I certainly wasn't going to take it upon myself to try to describe what that is or insert the actual language there. And then other than that, there's a change on 9, which is the result of something that we talked about in executive session, and then that's about it. There are a handful of other places where there were some things. One thing that you all mentioned, because a change that you had approved in the course of a new DD01, making the change that's seen on page 3 for 2D3, that section there. But other than those, I did not make a lot of changes. That isn't to say that I didn't think they were necessary or wasn't looking forward to having an opportunity to make them. And so language there in that spot that you're talking about in section 1A3, 100% willing to make that change and adjust it. I got from 1 or 2 commissioners, I had some communications just with some ideas that were already presented to me, but however it is, Chair, that you want to go through this, I'm eager to do so. And one last thing, which is that Detective Coro apologized for not being able to make it tonight of the BPOA, but he did say that they had reviewed this and largely found it to be unobjectionable based on things that are already there and that they know. So I don't want to speak for them and say that they've rubber stamped it and it's good to go, but they were largely good with this. And so now it's a matter of sort of hearing what you all have to say and moving forward with edits, et cetera.
Commissioner Cox, did you have any concern about page 2, invalid complaint, mental health, and are indicative of delusion or fantasy?
Well, yeah, I did, but I think it should be reworded a little bit because it sounds a little condescending, but that's something we can talk about.
Right, so maybe you and I can have a conversation and give the chief sort of, if we can thrash out a sentence and come up with a phrase that we can suggest to the chief. Would that work for you?
Yes.
So I can just go ahead and mention some of the questions I had and some things that I would like to see just sort of polishing up the document. And this is not just in this document alone. The consistency in referring to the commission as Board of Police Commissioners rather than Police Commission or Burlington Police Commission. I think we have done that ourselves in our documents. Sometimes we just say Burlington Police Commission when the actual language in the charter is Board of Police Commissioners. So I think maybe we want to mention, maybe we want to have a consistency.
Okay.
I think that was one. That's like a general observation. Page 10 of 30. Why does BPD or the city need to keep track of the complainant's name specifically?
Page 10.
Yeah.
Well, so that we can get back to that individual?
Keeping track of the record, and maintaining a written record with that.
If the person chooses not to be anonymous, we retain the information so that we can communicate with that person to let them know what's happened with the complaint.
Okay, to keep track, okay, all right. I was just, in terms of posterity,
Yeah.
right? I think that's where I was coming from, kind of, sometimes people feel uncomfortable.
Sure.
With that, they might feel uncomfortable, though I understand your reasoning here, so.
So these are confidential, like as it says above, the records are entirely confidential. We don't release them. They're not the city's posture has been they are not subject to public records law and that they are, they're subject to subpoena, but they're not subject to everything that gets written down. Anyway, when a complainant, for example, the emails that all of you get, right? You get every single complaint that comes through the online portal. If those people have named them, if the person making the complaint has named him or herself, then that's part of that record. It is not a public record, but it is what goes into the complaint and starts the complaint, and it is maintained in the complaint, and we use it to attempt to tell the person, we received your complaint, and we will be in touch as the complaint proceeds. And then once there is a final sort of dispensation or not, we generally try to let them know about that as well. Your complaint was sustained. We've done retraining. We are, trying to make this different. If discipline comes from it, we don't share that. That's the employee's privacy. But we would tell them that it was sustained and, the employee was disciplined. We just wouldn't say how or in what way or who.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else has any other questions? I can continue. I don't see any. Commissioner Hanson, looks like you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chairperson Rao. Just a couple, one question, and then I had 3 comments for you, Chief. On page 9, under the section 5 and little 1, where you talk about criminal investigations, little 1A, I had a question about, it says that an officer-involved shooting that does not result in a complaint will transition from an internal investigation to a use of force review. And I just didn't find another reference to what a use of force review, what that meant. I think I know what you mean by that, but I wasn't sure if that was what category that was, a supervisor review, an administrative review. It's at the very end of the process, I know, and the person's been cleared of any sort of wrongdoing, but then I don't know what use of force review, what you are referring to by that.
Sure. So this is what I mentioned that we spoke about in executive session last month, and so I want to tread carefully on it. But the concept and there was consensus from the commission in executive session about this concept. The concept is that if a use of force has occasioned a review by an external body like a attorney general or state's attorney, and those bodies determine that there's nothing improper about it, it was justified and lawful, and there is no additional complaint, then there is no rationale for having a supervisor review, administrative review, or internal investigation. Instead, it becomes what we do to every single use of force, which is a use of force review. Now, you're right, that isn't specifically described in this because a use of force review is not a disciplinary issue, and it's not a component of investigations and discipline. It is something that's done for every single use of force, the vast majority of which are not going to be disciplined because they're proper and are a component of policing. And in this instance,
Okay.
what this is saying is that has been determined by an external body, that it's not improper. There's no additional complaint that needs to be investigated or reviewed, and instead it becomes another use of force, obviously a more serious use of force if it occasioned an attorney general or state's attorney review, probably an officer-involved shooting, probably somebody who was injured. So that's more serious than an officer non-compliantly handcuffing somebody, at bar closing. But the review process isn't any different, and also doesn't have any additional presumption of guilt, because that presumption, that concern has already been removed by the external review.
Yes, that makes total sense to me now. And I think maybe it just stood out because I didn't know what context to put that in. So maybe adding something like the word standard to a standard use of force review. And if you do have a policy at all that talks about what you do in your normal and customary use of force reviews, you could put a reference to that policy. I don't know if you have such a thing, but even adding the word to just a standard use of force review as described in our such and such. So it's clear
Yes.
that takes it completely out of your DD40 policy.
Sure,
And then I
absolutely.
just had a couple more comments. I'll try to be quick about them because I don't want to take up a lot of time. The next section.
Can I say something? Can I say something, Commissioner Hanson? I wonder if the question is the word transition. Instead of transition, could it be sounds like categorization more than transition.
Sure.
That's, that's why it just automatically gets categorized to something else. The transition is where it sounds a little bit strange, right?
Would you prefer recategorized?
Recategorization automatically means that it's moved from one sphere to another. Sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Hanson.
No, that's fine, thank you. And then in section 6, the administrative quality control under B, procedures, I wondered, Chief, about whether it would be good to add something in there about having a duty to cooperate in the investigation and that there could be no retaliation against any officer by their participation. Something that makes it clear that they do need to participate and they can't be retaliated against for assisting with that investigation.
Is that in administrative quality of control? Is that what you're saying?
It's in administrative quality control, and just as I was reading through procedures, I just wondered about that. It just talks about a lot of, the supervisor being able to do all sorts of things in conducting their investigation. And I just wondered about adding something in there about, it says they can interview, various people, but making sure that it talks about no retaliation against the employee who is conducting a review, but at least my reading of this suggests that one of the things you'd be doing is talking to other employees. So just making sure that it's clear that you do, as an employee, have a duty to cooperate in this investigation and that you would not be retaliated against for your cooperation. A person who's just a witness, an officer employee who is a witness to the conduct.
Sure. I mean, that is the nature of a noticed interview, is that they have to cooperate with that interview insofar as matters of their employment are concerned, and then they are explicitly sort of protected from criminal prosecution for things that are said in the interview. That doesn't mean that you don't prosecute somebody who makes a criminal confession in an interview. It simply means that the statement that they made in a compelled interview can't be used in that criminal proceeding. You would stop the interview immediately, and then you would begin a criminal proceeding, but you wouldn't be able to use that specific statement. That's the nature of a noticed compelled interview.
I don't
Yeah,
think she's talking about.
I understand what you're talking about, but that seems that that's aimed at the target of the inquiry, and I was thinking more of people who were witnesses. But it's just a thought.
Sure.
You do what you want with it. And then page 10 under subsection G, statistical summary. I wondered if where you say if a trend indicating the need for training is detected, the deputy chief of administration shall make appropriate recommendations to the training unit and the chief of police. And I wondered there about adding in and inform the police commission.
Sure.
So I think we would like to know if you do detect a training trend and you're planning to train on it. I think it's important for us to know about it. And then
Absolutely.
I have one more quick comment for you, and then I'll be done. And it's in the section on page 14, subsection F, that talks about factors and disciplinary decisions. This is more of a style thing, and it's up to you, Chief, but just reading that, I felt like there was a lot of description in there that you probably would be better to avoid having so much description. I would make that section bullet points, and I would say the factors in a disciplinary decisions are bullet point 1, employee was acting in the public interest. Bullet point 2, degree of harm. Bullet point 3, level of experience. Bullet point 4, whether the person was acting in good faith. And bullet point 5, their history and past record.
That's a terrific suggestion. I very much agree with it. This language is in the DD40 that's currently extant, and part of the reason I kept it there is simply I didn't want to sort of go at it. I will take your counsel and try a version that is less explicit in this section.
Thank you. That's all my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Hanson. There are a couple from Commissioner Cox too, but I have at least 2 more. Page 16 of 30, CJIS has to be spelled out. the acronyms are, kind of just
I'm sorry, page which?
16 of 30.
I think that's because it was
Was
previously
it?
mentioned,
I missed it.
but I will 100% check to
Can
make
you
sure.
check? I was like, okay, maybe it's already been there.
I believe that it is mentioned on page 3 in the insert, where it says failing to maintain custody and control of weapons, criminal justice
I see
information
it.
services.
Yeah, got it. And finally,
I know the acronym, I know police acronyms are just terrible. I get it.
for somebody who's not in the profession, the acronym can be just unbearable sometimes. But page 17 of 30 is Commissioner Cox concern about the 14 days. And Commissioner Cox, do you want to address that, or do you want me to speak to it?
I think you and I are on the same page with that, and so go ahead.
So Commissioner Cox is concerned that no later than 14 days is unrealistic when it comes to police commission response. I think there has to be a longer period, and I tend to agree with her that 14 days would require a special meeting, and that has been really challenging for the commission. So I wonder if that we can change that time to something a little bit more flexible. We can move it to the next commission meeting. And also, I think that the other thing that Commissioner Cox wanted change was not just the summary, the description, but also all the materials associated with the particular case, allegations. So it's not just a summary that we need to receive and move forward, but all the materials as well. So I think what she's asking for, Commissioner Cox, what you are asking for is just a longer period of time.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was motivating this. I thought that I was in agreement with you on this.
No, I just
So,
want to make sure that I am saying what you had spoken to me about.
well, we can barely get a quorum for our regular meetings. If Chief, if you present us with a completed investigation summary, say in writing, say on the first of the month, then we would have to call a special, we would all have to, I guess, request all of the materials, review the materials, make a decision, all within, and have a special meeting to decide what we're going to do about it within 14 days of the date that you give us an oral or written summary. And as it stands right now, Commissioner Keefe usually asks for the body cam videos, the transcripts of interviews, all of the detailed information so that we can look at it and then decide on it at our next meeting. But so it just seems like the 14-day deadline is something that would be very difficult for us to comply with.
Yeah, and I truly appreciate how much all of you do, and also how difficult it is to sort of meet these issues. I think the reason that this language exists in the existing agreement from August 2020, which is where it comes from, is twofold. One is that it's really a process that is not supposed to happen very often. Actually, it's threefold. One is that it's really not a process that is supposed to happen very often. It really only applies, as it states in C2 on the same page, on page 17, in C2, any conduct for which suspension or termination is recommended. So anything that goes beyond a written reprimand, not a written reprimand, anything beyond a written reprimand, which is essentially suspension or termination, those are not frequent. That's one piece, that it's not frequent. The next piece is that although it's not frequent, when it does happen, we're talking about having an officer either out on administrative leave in all likelihood, or, you know, there's a need to impose a penalty quickly so that the officer can potentially return, or the employee, because it could be a CSO, can return to work, can get that discipline out of the way and then return to work. And so we want to keep that in mind. That's something that certainly the union brought up when they were last here, which was that concern about how long these things do or don't take. And then the third piece, which I only really sort of thought as we were discussing it, is that at least lately, the commission has not wanted to see complete reports of this nature, because it wants to preserve its ability to act as an appellate body if necessary. So that when we get to the stage of saying, there is a disciplinary case, I've informed you about it when it began, I've informed you about its status as it's moved along, and now I have come up with a preliminary or a recommended dispensation, which is going to include suspension, is going to include termination. When offering to make the full record available, the commission has said, we will not take that because it is likely that the discipline you're proposing may be appealed, and we would like to maintain our ability to act as an appellate body. So for those three reasons, I would be a little reluctant to change the 14-day, but again, I cannot approve this without your approval. So
Okay,
if the commission says, nope, that's a deal breaker for us, then that's going to be the way it gets written.
Commissioner Cox, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So it was my understanding from reading the actual words that are on the page, and I could have misread it, but it's my understanding that for any complaint, your disposition then is for us to, so it's not just the complaints where you've decided to impose discipline, but for any complaint, we can agree with you, we can ask you to reconsider, or ask for more investigation, and then you can refuse to do any of those things. But then we have 14 days, time limit of 14 days to come to a decision to ask for one of the three things. And so it's not just in the cases of discipline, it could be in the case of a non-discipline, but where we're looking at it and going, gee, it looks to us like maybe some discipline should have been imposed. But it's still like that 14-day timeline.
Well, I think that if you look at C1, it talks about the chief providing a verbal or written summary of the complaints and their status or disposition, which indicates that disposition can happen for the lower levels before, in other words, it's sort of done when it comes in. This was exonerated. It did not involve a written reprimand or a suspension or a termination, and then that is reported to the police commission. Of course, the commission can say, we disagree with that. Of course, the commission can ask the chief either to reconsider, or can ask the chief to explain why, or can tell the chief this is not how it should go in the future. Any of those things is possible. And in those cases, the 14-day period is somewhat moot in that the commission can take as long as it wishes to make those kinds of responses. But that's how I distinguish between the notion of the 14-day applying to cases where there's something pending, there's a disciplinary outcome that is in fact ticking away.
Yeah, but it doesn't say there that that D does not apply to C1. See, I think that's where the confusion is, because that's how you are describing it. Am I getting that right?
D absolutely can apply to C1, but if C1 has already been disposed, then it's a different issue than if it hasn't. And there are sections in this document that say very clearly that, I think, where is it? If you take a look at page 13, at the top of section 7, in certain instances described below in 9C2, the chief of police must share a recommendation for discipline with the police commission prior to finalizing that discipline. And that is a difference.
You know, I think that Commissioner Commissioner Keefe is most knowledgeable about that, but he's not here tonight. And so can we put this particular issue over until Commissioner Keefe can weigh in? Because he in fact does ask for videos, he asks for transcripts, he asks for the whole package for us to review, and I've reviewed many, many of them. So it's not only like your summary, but we also get like a complete package from the police department that we're able to look at and say, yeah, you know, we can look at the tape and we agree that that there wasn't a that, for example, that the complaint was not well founded.
Commissioner Hanson?
I was just going to weigh in on what Commissioner Cox was raising here, and just wondering if it would make more sense to have paragraph D, Police Commission response, only refer to 2, only have those options, and have that paragraph only modify what is in C2. C1 would be standalone, that the chief of police for a low or mid-level complaint would simply tell us about a written summary and the disposition. If folks wanted to have the option, I think you could put something in there about, if the commission unanimously agreed or something, that it could be bumped to a high-level complaint, and then it would follow this other process. But I don't really see the point in having all of those steps available for a very low level complaint. And I worry that someone could say, well, why didn't the police commission do all of these steps with a complaint that is something where the person is going to get a recorded notice in their file to do it differently in the future? I'm not sure that that would be a good use of time for us to have all of those steps. I'm not sure we would want to even have that as an option to avail ourselves of that much process for a very low level type of situation. So I don't know, just a thought. I could see us just having D apply only to C2, and you would just need to move it so it showed that it was modified, only modifying what is in paragraph 2 and not 1.
Certainly, I could see that working. The other thing that I think could be done is an explicit addition to C1 that states that all the things that Commissioner Cox is describing Commissioner Keefe as having previously requested in certain instances are listed and explicitly noted, that in addition to the written summary and the status or disposition, any materials associated with the incident can be shared, legal requirements allowing. We have in the past had instances in which, for example, there have been juvenile issues associated with certain cases that have made sharing more challenging. But in any normal instance, I certainly would have no objection to saying, you already have the complaint, it came in on the portal, you've seen it. Here is the supervisor's review. You want to see that as well as as the verbal summary if it's important to see that. And if you also want to see the report that the supervisor looked at as part of the supervisor's review, if you want to see or listen to the dispatch audio that was a component of it, I would have no objection to any of that. Or the body camera that's associated with the incident. That's entirely body camera viewing for cause. So we could insert something like that into C1 and then do what Commissioner Hanson is suggesting and have D apply to C2.
I still think that Commissioner Keefe needs to weigh in on this.
Sure.
He can't be here for personal reasons, but as soon as he returns, I think we will ask him to weigh in on him, because he's the one who essentially makes these recommendations and, sort of is responsible. He's sort of the subcommittee of one to do so. So I think we should defer until he returns in the May meeting, and maybe at that point, and I can certainly send him the information for him. He may agree with Commissioner Hanson's point. Okay. Are there any other questions, thoughts? Anyone else? Or we can move to our next agenda item. I don't seeing no hands. Item 5.1 and 5.2, use of force reports. Any discussions or requests for review? We are still awaiting the two requests that were made in January by Commissioner Keefe. I received an email from Shannon saying that we will be receiving those videos, and
I'm sorry for that. That's
yeah,
not,
no, that's fine.
That
It
should
was-
have been.
The email was a little confusing, and I wasn't sure what was going on. DC Labarge was supposed to send them. On the other hand, since Commissioner Keefe is not here, he may have received them, for all we know, right?
My sense,
So-
my sense is that he may have.
Yes, okay.
I don't imagine that there would have been any balking. The only other thing is that I cannot emphasize enough how much I rely on both deputy chiefs and how busy they both are. But
I got
this
that
should have been transmitted. So
No, I think what happened, there was a little confusion because it was supposed to be sent to all of us.
okay,
Whoever has fingerprinted and sort of gone through the training. And I received that notification.
gotcha.
That one commissioner hasn't. So I think that then, but with the notification that it will be shared with all of us, and then I never heard back. So
Gotcha.
I think it just got shoved in the side. So maybe that's something that's still pending, the January requests, the two requests. And I don't see any this for this month. So I think those are the only two.
Okay, I'm writing right now
That's
to
fine.
the team
And I
to
should
try to
follow.
get that addressed. I don't want to
And I
sit
should
on it.
follow it up.
So I apologize for being, anyway, I'm
no,
dealing
that's
with
fine.
your request right now, and not, because it should have been dealt with before.
Item 6, Commissioner comments. Are there any comments from Commissioner Oski?
Thank you. I was at a school board committee meeting last week, and we got a report from the safety team, and they let us know that this Burlington School District has renewed their partnership with the Burlington Police Department, and that they have some CSOs that are working regularly with the Burlington School Department and their safety team, and I was glad to hear that. It sounded like they were really welcomed the role of the CSOs and
I think it's the CSLs.
CSLs. Oh, it is CSLs? It's not CSOs?
Forgive me, yes, I believe it's the CSLs, not the CSOs.
Okay. Well, they were happy to have some renewed relationship with the Burlington Police Department.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Oski. My comment is, of course, I will be saying this at every meeting. My quest for staff support and renewing commission attorney's contract, Anthony Arapino's contract continues. And I have a meeting with Aaron Jacobson, who's the chief of staff of the mayor, tomorrow at the mayor's office. And a meeting with City Council President Ben Travers is also forthcoming. So while we thanked Tim for helping us for tonight, we hope to get some staff support, more staff support, I think. Item 7, any other, Commissioner Hanson?
Yes, thank you, Chairperson Rao. I just wanted to say this is a bigger conversation, I think, than we can have tonight, of course. But I am very interested, Chief, in seeing how the department might find a way to have someone answer calls to the police department rather than have the automated, you have to choose a response. I feel like I know it's a hard time with staffing shortage to be advocating for something like that, but I think it's critical that a person answer the phone. I don't think it's critical that it be an officer, but I think you have to be able to get someone on the telephone when you need help and you have a question. And I don't think that currently the way it works, it's too off-putting. And so I just wanted to mentioned that, and I have heard you talk every meeting, and I completely understand the reasons we have the priority response plan, and I do appreciate that the department is attempting to clarify that better for the public, but it just doesn't work well. People feel that they can't get a police response when they need it. And I'm wondering if there is some way of working into that incidents in process, incidents in progress that like the dispatcher can at least try to connect someone with an officer in charge. Maybe they can't dispatch an officer right away, but I'm thinking about the incident that happened on Church Street where the individual threw a table through the window of a business and there were employees inside. They were very scared. Maybe that individual needed some kind of help. Who knows? But I think that having incidents like that occur and then having the response be like, well, that fits under vandalism, so we can't dispatch an officer. I think it discourages people from calling the police the next time they really need them. And I also just think it's really, really scary um, for the people involved. And so I just would like us to see the way to take a look at if there's an incident in progress, maybe dispatchers having the authority to put an officer in charge if they're available to talk to the folks, to find out what's going on, and to figure if, maybe they do need to pull an officer from something they're responding to go to this, depending on the fear level or the problem level of what's occurring, even if it is something like vandalism, And I just feel like when you put things into boxes like this, it just sometimes just doesn't work well. And I'd like to see us develop some flexibility to be able to use some discretion to try to connect people with a human being rather than have the response from the dispatcher like you just need to file that online. I think that's creating a lot of concern from the
Yeah.
public and also a feeling that they just don't have, they're very discouraged by it. And I
Yeah.
just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, so having a human telephone operator would be terrific if we could staff that or afford that. In the case that you're talking about, it really is awful what happened to that business, and the idea that somebody frightened people in the building and threw that table through at the glass window. However, they did not call immediately. That call came in more than 10 minutes after the incident. It wasn't to 911, it was to dispatch. They listened through the phone tree twice. When they were spoken to by dispatch asked them if the person were still there, if they needed that immediate assistance. They stated no to both of those. They did speak to the dispatcher. The dispatcher spoke directly to the OIC and got back to them and said, well, absent these other issues, it is a vandalism according to the priority response plan, and it is an online report. But had that been a 911 call when it was happening, an officer in all likelihood would have been dispatched and sent to it. However, in this particular instance, maybe not, because in fact, we did only have 2 officers available at the time. The other 2 were on another call for service already. There are, and again, there wasn't an immediate life safety component, certainly not by the time the complainants called the department. That is not meant to minimize the alarm and sense of fear that something like that causes and brings about. I would love to be able to have a human who could answer the phone all the time, but the dispatchers can't. They definitely couldn't when we only had 4 dispatchers in the room. As we are getting closer to 14, we may be able to diminish the phone tree, change the phone tree a bit. That's certainly something that we'd like to. The phone tree is described explicitly in the new description of the priority response plan that's mounted online, so people can see what's in that phone tree. And sooner or later, some people will figure out that how to get around the phone tree by sort of pressing the things you want to press right off the bat. But the reason it was created is simply that Dispatch was entirely overwhelmed when there were only 4 full-time employees and everyone else was being there part-time on overtime. And the volume of incident is, was and continues to rise.
Commissioner Hanson? Oh, Commissioner Cox has a question.
I think that Commissioner Comerford was before me.
Yes,
Commissioner Comerford, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
that's okay. It's not a problem. No problem. Chief, I would also say, that I live adjacent to the Price Chopper Shopping Center. And the side gate that leads across home and then goes down Wells Street has become sort of the short trail for people who are daily, sort of stealing things out of those stores. And, we find sometimes multiple handfuls of hangers. They took the clothes off the hangers and they throw them in the street or whatever. And there's getaway cars there, the whole deal. And I just wonder sometimes if, like, maybe once a week or twice a week, if someone could who's doing the South End could just stop there, and then do a little patrol or something, that might ease it up a little bit. But the neighbors are, quite concerned about it. So just an FYI.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cox?
So I just wanted to say, I've had really good success in getting the help that's needed over the past few months. Getting street outreach involved, getting officers to go check out a situation. I call 911 if it's something urgent, and they connect me with the people that are like on duty that would be responding to something like that. And I also wanted to compliment the last time that I went through 911, the officers went and checked out the situation. And then one of the officers actually called me back at home and said what had happened, to just be reassuring. And I didn't get the officer's name, or I got it, but I immediately forgot. But I did want to compliment that circling back around. Thank you.
Commissioner Cox, that should have gone in the commendations. But just a note. Just going back to what Commissioner Cox said, when I went to meet with Detective Coro and I was outside the building, Chief, I could not get in touch with anyone inside. In the old days, when I came to see you, there was a directory, and the sign still exists saying, call the directory, but there is no directory anymore. So just kind of, I don't know what has happened. Has the directory disappeared? Somebody has taken it off?
That is a good question. It may have been, were you in the entry that is closest to the park, or the one that's on the
Closest to
parking
the
lot?
park, closest to the park,
That
yeah.
was significantly affected by the arson, and I'm not certain
That's what I
if
thought.
we're.
I thought
yeah.
that because it says there,
But
and it
sh-
looks like there was
But
some
there should be
damage.
something there.
Yeah.
The arson was in November.
Right, so and it looks like there was some damage done to the wall. It hasn't been fixed, so yeah. So just a kind of notification. Okay, unless anyone else has anything else to add, I'm not seeing any hands up there. Item 7, officer commendation. I just have one, and I'm just going to read quickly. I wanted to, and this is from the person who wrote, I wanted to highlight the support of Officer Henry when I called seeking support on how resident X can gain access to her apartment late at night after failed attempts in her trying to connect with CHT maintenance and nowhere else to go with her baby. I greatly appreciate his willingness and collaboration in connecting with dispatch and CHT maintenance after hours, keeping me in the loop and sharing when maintenance was on their way to let her in. Item 8 is commission business. We can start with the discussion about the Burlington Dog Task Force, which we were asked to comment upon. And I know Commissioner Hanson, you sent me a few comments. Do you want to speak to them now that you're here? Commissioner Hanson? I don't see her. So I can just read what she sent me. I hope she's here. There's no money right now for the city to hire an officer for this. Perhaps we could recommend approving without additional funding and instead train a CSO. there is a great need for a school resource officer, and I think these specialized positions need to be considered for funding as a whole by city council. I'm also concerned about the language that allows a citizen to damage property, like breaking a window if a dog is in distress. An officer needs to be involved in a situation like that arises. So those are her comments. I don't know if Attorney McClanahan is here, because these comments actually go to Attorney McClanahan. She had sent us the dog task force recommendations. Also, Attorney McClanahan, we are the Animal Control Committee, correct? I think that sort of is in the dog task force. That we are a subcommittee. The Police Commission subcommittee is the Animal Control Committee. The dog task force actually asks us to add a licensed veterinarian and a certified animal behavior professional. You know, that just from my perspective, that would require some volunteers from the local veterinary.
And it would require an ordinance update as well to
Okay.
update, because right now you're correct. It is a subcommittee of this commission, and under our ordinance, it specifically says 3 members to be appointed by the chair. So if we were going to change the composition of the subcommittee to include professionals from the community, the ordinance would need to be updated by the city council to reflect that. I think certainly the commission could give its feedback to the either the ordinance committee or city council, as it were, when this is going to be taken up. So in terms of those recommendations from the dog task force, for the commission to weigh in on that, but it's not something that the commission can unilaterally add to the subcommittee composition.
Right, so who do I send these comments to?
They can probably be directed to the ordinance committee. I know that they'll be taking the recommendations up as a whole. So whether you want to work with the chair to have a representative of the commission attend, or just send written comments, I think it would be appreciated by both the committee and the task force.
Right, because the data actually that's being used is from 2019, and as a cat owner, I think there's just like too much cat bias in this report. The fact that we have to now license cat and what we're gonna call BPD if we see an at-large cat. I mean, sorry, that's obviously my position on this is being reflected. But anyway, anyone else has any other questions or concerns or thoughts? Otherwise, I will list the ones that I have and send it over to the ordinance committee. 8.2 is Police Commission Annual Report. Again, I have a comment from Commissioner Hansen. Is this an unreasonable expectation when all our meetings are open to the public and recorded? Parks Commission did not do an annual report. We did a review of the director, and I'm quoting Commissioner Hansen. I think asking us for a review of the chief is reasonable, but not an annual report. I actually haven't had time to find out what other commissions are required to write an annual report without any staff support. Our last staff support was for 20 hours a week, but we still have the same mayoral directive. I think we're required to write the annual report. Should we form a subcommittee then? Any volunteers for the subcommittee to put together an annual report, perhaps over summer? Any thoughts, Commissioner Cox? Is that a hand to say, yes, you're going to volunteer to work with me?
Well, at least there was one issue that I thought we could just put to rest, and I've communicated with Shannon Trammell about it. And she said she tried to help, but when I told her what I wanted, I didn't hear back from her again. And so it may have been too much that I wanted. I don't know. So I'll try to reach out to her again. But I think that there's a lot of issues from the last one that things have changed sufficiently that we can put some of those to rest.
Right, and I think we don't have to be, when I was envisioning it, doesn't have to be that long. It could be a short document too, so it's possible to put together something quickly. Okay. Any other volunteers? Commissioner Oski?
I'm not here for much of the summer, but I will help you towards the end of the summer.
Perfect, thank you. 8.3, commission comment to the Charter Change Committee. Any additions? I just added the 2 comments that Detective Coro made. And you can see that in the document. I kept them very brief. Are there any other comments, any other discussions, or people feel like the document, our suggestions can be forwarded to the joint committee? Hearing no comments, I think my suggestion is that we agree that we can send the current list of changes or suggestions to the joint committee of the city council.
I move that we send those comments on the charter change to the joint committee.
Okay, is that a motion? Help me out here.
Yes, I
Commissioner
moved it.
Oski.
Yes.
Okay, all right, any discussion? Is there a second? I can second it. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I,
All right. Anyone else? I need at least one other vote. Am I correct? I need to hear
I'm
from.
just making sure we still have a quorum here. I don't know
Yeah.
if we've got a couple that may have lost connection.
Well, I guess we'll adjourn.
Glad to adjourn. I just sent a text. Hopefully, I'm there. Okay, we have quorum. Right, we have quorum. So, yes, we have quorum, right? Yes, 4 of us. Okay, so thank you, Commissioner.
So the motion was to approve the document of our comments on the charter change and forward those on to the joint committee. And it was seconded.
So all in favor, say aye.
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 I,
Susie? Comerford, Commissioner Comerford?
Let's see, I was muted. I've said aye 4 times.
Okay, all right. Okay, so the motion passes. Discussion, where are we?
Body worn camera.
Body worn camera, policy discussion and approval. I have a comment from Detective Coro. Quick update, I met with Detective Coro and we had a productive discussion. He has one concern, and that's from the phrase organizational culture. That's the one that he wanted to be struck. I actually was agreeable to that just because if you look at from my perspective, this is my position, when you look at all the descriptions of the body worn, of the use of force reports we receive, I'm not sure how much we can derive from those summaries and organizational culture, or even watching the body worn camera, is that we can get a lot in terms of data and understanding organizational culture from those videos. But obviously that's my position. Other people can weigh in. I know Commissioner Cox had thoughts about that, and Commissioner Oski. Go ahead.
Are you saying that just the phrase improving organizational culture, so the bullet would read helping to develop a modern police force which is diverse, transparent, and accountable?
Exactly.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
But I know that Commissioner Cox had some concerns and questions, or at least some concern. Commissioner Cox.
No, I kind of like the phrase, but if they don't like it, if it seems too vague to them, then that's fine.
Okay. Commissioner Comerford, Commissioner Hanson, any thoughts? Otherwise, we will help me out here, Commissioner Oski. The motion would be, go ahead.
I move to approve the body-worn camera policy, footage review policy that is the proposed draft dated 3/6/24 with one amendment, and that is to delete the words improving organizational culture and in sub 1 small 1. So it would read, that bullet would read, helping to develop a modern police force which is diverse, transparent, and accountable, and.
I second. Any discussions?
Yes, I have a discussion.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm with Mary. I think that organizational culture is a very central part of how an organization functions. I'm not going to stop it, but I do think it's very, very important to think about that and to include that.
Commissioner Oski.
If I could respond, I think the way that this reads now, Commissioner Comerford, is that the Burlington Police Commission may review body-worn camera footage or other footage based on the totality of circumstances for the express articulated purposes of gathering information related to, it would read, helping to develop a modern police force which is diverse, transparent, and accountable. And I think within that is improving organizational culture is part of a modern police force. So I feel like it's not limiting, by removing those words, it's not necessarily limiting us from considering organizational culture if there's something in a use of force or in an incident that we need to consider. So I hear what you're saying, but I think that the rest of that clause is broad enough to encompass that consideration.
As I said before, I'm not going to stop it. So go
Can
ahead.
I just, can I
Commissioner
just ask a
Henson?
question?
Yes.
Did that change? I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask a quick question. Was the taking that language out, was that something that the union has asked for? Is that,
Yes, yes.
okay. Yeah,
Detective
I'm
Coro
fine with that.
asked, because he felt that improving organizational culture is too broad to be derived from just if I understood him correctly, body-worn camera, use of force from body-worn camera. It just seems like too broad of a phrase. And I agree with Commissioner Oski that the second half is actually, to me, much more compelling and important. And they have agreed that they're perfectly acceptable of having that included. So.
Okay, thank you.
So are we ready to vote? All
Yes.
in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Raise
Aye.
your hand, looks like, so that motion passes unanimously.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So this is really directed towards Chief Murad. The main thing I sort of wanted to get out of all of this was some mechanism by which we can have a discussion with the BPD about it. Perhaps like a meeting with the Chief Murad, a meeting with like the lieutenant in charge of training, some sort of feedback mechanism so that when we review things and we're not trying to, obviously discipline or punish somebody, but we just see that, wow, it's like there's a consistent, or there's instances, for example, of like not following a directive, but it may be that the directive is out of date. It may be that the portions of it don't make sense. It may be for a bunch of different reasons. But it would be useful, I think, to have a mechanism to meet and confer when we do see things that concern us.
I would love such a mechanism in meeting. I certainly don't object to that. I think that if you observe something in videos, you absolutely should bring it to the attention of myself or of Deputy Chief Labarge or of Deputy Chief Lebrecq. I think currently probably the easiest thing is a commissioner either reaching out to me one-on-one for something they've seen and that has caused them concern, but I know that Commissioner Keefe has a relatively open line of communication with Deputy Chief Labarge, and I'm certain that he probably already does this to the extent that he observes things that cause pause or cause him to question. And then it's a matter of ensuring that then a good answer is given. And if we have an answer, we'll deliver it. This is a normal procedure, or this is ugly, but it is how it's done, or I know that looks strange, but that's how they are trained, or gosh, that didn't look good to me either. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. This is problematic.
Thank you, Commissioner Cox. Is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a motion to adjourn? Am I seeing someone?
Attorney McClanahan.
Sorry, not a motion
Oh,
to
I'm
adjourn.
sorry. I did not see your hand.
Not a
Attorney
motion to
McClanahan.
adjourn, Chair, but just a very quick, hopefully short recommendation to the commission, which may be for visibility, to perhaps consider sending this newly minted policy to the city council as a communication on their next agenda, and also once we have it in final form with the commission's permission, I will just transmit this by email to the BPOA to kind of close the loop on the communications that we've been having to date, and interested in the commission's feedback on those action items.
So who do I send who on the city council do I send it to? Or do I send it to you and you can transmit it to whomever?
I can, or you can send it to Lori Olberg, who is the clerk for the city council, and she'll just put it in the list of communications to the council, whichever you'd prefer.
Okay, I will do so. Thank you so much. So
Don't
is there
forget,
a?
can I ask
Yeah,
a
go ahead,
question? So
Commissioner Cox.
doesn't the city council actually have to approve it?
I think because it's an internal sort of working policy that, the commission has authority to its own self-governance to a certain extent. And so I think where this is really a means to an end of carrying out the commission's charge that the city council has empowered it to do, I don't think this goes beyond that or goes outside the scope of the commission's function. So I really, I think it's important to inform the council, but I don't see this as being a new sort of authority that the commission is asking for. It's really just a procedure by which the commission is going to carry out an already approved function. So I think, in short, I think it's important to inform the council, but I'm not concerned about them giving formal authorization.
Okay, thank you. Third attempt, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I don't know, Commissioner Oski, you need to come back and vote to adjourn. Can you vote to adjourn? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. So you'll be in touch with me, or should I read?